In this video I want to go over the differences between the Beretta and the Girsan Regard. Beretta M9 92FS on your right, Girsan Regard on your left. Now, the obvious differences right off the bat is that I'm basically comparing a railed Regard versus a non-railed 92FS. And that's what it is, it's a 92FS. But if you look at the differences between the M9A1, which would probably be a more solid comparison, and the Regard, this railed version, they're pretty much the same. The frame here extends out on the 92A1, it thickens up at this area, or the M9A1. The 92A1, because it is also the same frame for the 96A1, it just has a thicker frame overall to handle the .40 caliber. So anyways, let's go ahead and get on to the comparisons. We're going to ignore the fact that it has a rail. First thing I want to talk about is the grips. Now, as you can see, the Beretta has no finger grooves, where the Girsan Regard does. And this has a little bit of a hump on the back. You know, it's just a little bit. And it's really not that much, it just humps out a little bit here. But that's about it. It's not all that bad, and I do like this grip. It's very solid, very easy to hold on to. And then, of course, the Regard here, it seems to have a little less of a dramatic hump, and I think maybe it's just the contour at the end here is not as dramatic as it is on the Beretta. Because, as you can see, it kind of takes a sharper turn. If you want to see those two there. So the grip angle may be a little bit different on these two pistols, but overall I think the Regard has a little bit of a more ergonomic grip. And also, one thing you'll want to note is these grip panels right here, noticeably thinner on the Regard. So that's something that gives it the illusion of being smaller, but it's actually not an illusion. It legitimately is a little bit thinner, which I think is great. I wish Beretta would have done this, upgraded it a little bit, kind of like how SIG has their E2 grip. But overall, the Beretta still is a very ergonomic pistol, very awesome grip, and it's very easy to get to the trigger. The trigger reach is basically the same on both of these pistols, so I'm not really going to classify an advantage for one over the other. This is just facts that I'm trying to show you. So obviously you have the serrations on the Beretta. They're very close together. My impressions of it are that the Regard, it's a little bit sharper on the serrations. They're spaced a little bit further apart, but as you can see, I've used these serrations a good amount, and if we can focus there, you'll see the dirt and nastiness from me racking this thing. The corners here are a little bit, not really sharp, but they're somewhat shallow. But because the corners are not extremely chamfered, you do get a better grip on this rather than these very close together rounded off serrations on the Beretta. So that's something to take into account. So the next thing is triggers. Now, the trigger reach is basically the same on both of these pistols, but what I notice is that the Regard, and I'll explain why I think this is happening, the Regard seems to have a much smoother trigger than the Beretta. The Beretta, at first it was very smooth, and if you grease it up properly in the proper areas and you follow those high friction points where it wears, then you can smooth out the trigger just as much. And it seems like the Regard has a little bit of a lighter trigger, but I think this might be a mix between an illusion and sort of, reality. The illusion being that it's just a lighter trigger overall, but the reality of it is this is a nitrided finish, and it's a very tough finish. It doesn't wear all that much. It's had 1,000 rounds through it, so expect a performance review soon, but overall it feels lighter and it feels a lot smoother. The nitride finish is very smooth. The Bruniton finish is kind of a similar idea, but it doesn't just wear away. In some cases it'll just flake away. I mean, look at this here. The finish just flaked away, and yeah, it's not the most graceful finish out there, but overall it's not that bad. But I think it's just a slightly more abrasive finish. I don't know how the M9 would be, but Yeah, you can see there's a little bit of a difference, but not that much in the magwell. This is the area that's going to see the most wear, at least in 1,000 rounds after my usage. So let's go ahead and move on to the next thing. You can, establish how you feel about the triggers, but I feel that the single action, I'll just go back to the triggers. I feel that the single action is a little bit softer, and again, I think that's friction from the finish. Not necessarily anything to do with springs or anything, even though the springs are pretty tight on the Zenith firearms, or the Gearsong firearms. These are imported by Zenith. So I think it more has to do with the finish. So I already touched on finish, and now I want to talk about the locking block systems. Okay, now we're going to look at the locking blocks, and I disassembled both the pistols, and we'll go ahead and move on from here. We have plenty to discuss in here. So, with the locking block, I'll start off with the Beretta. And first thing, kind of to reinforce what I was talking about with the finish, you can see here it kind of flakes away a little bit. It's not really consistent. It's interesting. And here, it's almost the same wear pattern, but it just wears a little more gracefully. So, anyways, back to the locking block. Go ahead and take this out on the Gearsong, and I keep saying Zenith, it's the Regard, it's the Gearsong Regard, but it's imported by Zenith, so I keep going back to that. But anyways, I want you to notice it's angled. This locking block is angled, whereas if we take the Beretta locking block into account, it is straight up and down. And this would probably be better. So as you can see, straight up and down, angled. I don't know why that is. It's kind of a mystery to me, but that's just a fact. So you're not going to be able to use Beretta barrels or locking blocks interchangeably, so don't really count on being able to do that. Unless maybe you can take out the locking blocks themselves and exchange them, use a Beretta barrel and a locking block. Maybe that would work, but I wouldn't really count on it, and I'm not going to try it, not yet anyways. But one thing I want to note here is that this thing is clean of machining marks right here. It is so smooth, and it is CNC'd out, but so is the Beretta slide. And when this focuses, you see these little areas right here, these angled cuts. These are actually round cuts, and that's where the CNC tool is going down, and it's just going down and then cutting, going down and then cutting, going down and cutting. That's just how it is. It wasn't really clean. It was basically done very fast from the looks of it, and it really wasn't something they were really caring to do a beautiful finish off. But this area is not really important to do a pretty finish on, so I don't really hold that against the Beretta. Another thing I would like to note is the lack of polymer components on the Regard. And it's all metal. Everything is metal. There's no polymers in it. Like Beretta is using a lot of polymers. I would think that they could drop the price a little bit, because polymer is typically easier to manufacture. You can do it in mass. It's relatively inexpensive, but it is what it is. But of course, that means you get a steel guide rod. You don't have to pay extra to get it. So here's something that actually is kind of weird to me. If you see this finish on here, the wear, it's really inconsistent, and this does not look like the same finish that's on the pistol. And when I talk to Zenith, sometimes you get a nitrided finish, and sometimes the Regards come just painted over. And I don't know if that's just a manufacturer thing where they get lazy, or they're working on the nitride bath or whatever, and they can't finish it up or whatever, and they just paint over. I have no idea why, but that doesn't really give me a warm and fuzzy, really. But I wish they was a little more consistent, but that is what it is. Another thing to note is that both of them have chrome lined barrels, and on the right here you have the Beretta barrel, and on the left you have the Regard barrel. As you can see, also the barrels are a little bit different in the way that the feed ramp is done. It's a little more narrow. I'm not sure why that is, but that's just how it is. Honestly, I think this would be a little more reliable. It's a little more room to catch around if it doesn't want to stay on course. But it seems to work all right, so I don't know. That's up to you to decide. The Regard just doesn't seem to wear that much, and it doesn't have a well-protected crown, which, if you're looking for a gun that can basically survive, you know, kind of like the M9, deal with getting thrown in the dirt, that probably wouldn't be the Regard. The crown is not very well protected. But you can see it's a very clean chrome line barrel. So the Beretta is too, but you know, sometimes you get ones that are a little sloppy like this. They kind of went a little over, and you know, that's just something to take into account. But who cares, really? Okay, now let's talk about magazines. The Regard comes with 3 15-round magazines. It's a pretty good deal. And they are basically straight up M9 magazines. There's a little bit of a difference. If you notice these patterns here, right here you got the diamond and nothing. Diamond and then a little dimple right here. Kind of weird. And then you have a crimp right here. It's basically a little bit higher than this one, obviously, but yeah, I don't know why they restricted it. I wish they would just let it go down the full length, and I'm pretty sure you could fit like 18 rounds just like the other Mec-Gar magazines. And here's the thing, Mec-Gar for Girsan, made in Italy, clearly stated on the magazine, very proudly so. Now with these M9 magazines in the Regard, what I have experienced, I don't know if you'll experience or not. This is a relatively new Beretta magazine. This one came with my 92FS, but this one has fed reliably. I've surplus magazines that are basically the same as this, just made by a different company. And then you have one of the surplus magazines. This one has done fairly well. I believe I only had 1 or 2 times where it failed to lock back the slide on the last shot fired, but I'm starting to have issues with some of the Beretta mags as far as, you know, not locking back in the Regard. So if the springs are worn and stuff like that, they're not going to be too incredibly reliable, and I think that is basically just an issue of spring tension. But if you look at the areas that where the slide stop actually catches, we'll see if we can line these up here. It would appear that the Regard magazine is level and it's a little higher at the back, which is probably where the slide catches being caught. And then this one, it swoops down a little bit. And this one does not tilt very much. This one tilts a good amount. So, you know, you got a bit of tilt there, and you don't have much of any tilt. It's basically like an anti-tilt follower. So stock magazines work great. You get 3 of them, so that's probably a good thing. Okay, now let's move on to the fun part and talk about price. The Regard, even the railed version, they're coming in the same price. The non-railed and railed version, they're coming in at about $420, and you order off ZenithFirearms.com, straight from their site. Beretta, it really depends on where you go. I've seen them some places for $500 even. This one I paid mid to high $500, but you can find surplus 92FS pistols or what have you from police trade-ins, and they'll be like $300. I've seen them for $300, maybe low fours, basically the same price as Zenith pistols. Now, here's the thing. This basically will break down to parts, right? Because, of course, out of the box you get 3 magazines with this, whereas if you get a trade-in that's basically a better deal or the same deal, you're going to get 1 magazine, most likely. 99% of the time they only give you 1 magazine, unless you're buying it used from somebody else or whatever. Now, let's talk about parts. The parts for the Girsan, and again I keep saying Zenith, the parts for the Girsan are somewhat interchangeable. As we discussed, the locking block of the Girsan is not interchangeable with the Beretta. The other internal components, I would imagine, are relatively, interchangeable for the most part. I didn't screw around with it that much, but I would assume they're pretty much the same. Dimensionally, I measured with my calipers and they were pretty much exactly the same. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. So I would assume that the new decocker only safety levers would work, and Zenith is assuring me that they tried it out and that it did work. Their gunsmiths did report that it did work, but they didn't say if they had to, they didn't confirm or deny if they had to do any fitting, filing it down or taking an edge off here or there. So I don't know. So I'm going to have to find that out in the future, because I definitely need one of those, because I'm good with how it is, but I really don't like having to manipulate a safety every time, because I have to make it consistent every time I reload, every time I draw it. It's a pain in the ass. But anyways, last thing is warranty. So the warranty on the Girsan from Zenith is, if you go through Zenith, it is 5 years. You have a 5-year warranty against defects, and if something breaks prematurely, which is the primary reason for a warranty, they'll cover it. They'll take the firearm back or let you take care of it yourself if they have the parts available. They don't always have the parts, every single little part. Just be aware of that. I found that out when I thought I had lost a part. The back of my NC-28, they didn't have any of the back covers for the striker. That I don't think that's really an item that they hear much about, as far as something that gets lost a lot. But me. So anyways, with Beretta, I believe it's around the same. If you sign up, I think it's like 2 years, and then you can extend it or something like that. But I don't know. I've had very good success with Beretta. I've had very good success with Zenith. They're very big on customer service. Every time you call Zenith, you get a human being. And with Beretta, you gotta press 1, press 3, press 7, climb a mountain, and hope that somebody talks to you and that they know what they're talking about. And yeah, so with that, Beretta takes forever to send parts out. From my experience, it took them a month to get me a replacement trigger return spring. So yeah, stuff like that is something to consider, definitely. But if you send the gun in, they're very quick. So that's kind of odd there. Sending parts out is not a priority, but to each their own. So really, in the end, you make your own decisions. I mean, all things being the same, I prefer the Regard. The Regard just is a little more comfortable for me. I like the fact that you get a rail. It's a very good value. But at the same time, it doesn't really wear much. For me, I love pistols that have a lot of wear on them. It's just really nice to me. So I love my Beretta. I want to shoot it more until it starts looking like a military-issued M9. I think that's just beautiful. But I'm a weirdo like that. This finish is not really wearing on the Regard like I would like. The barrel has very little to no wear on it, so it's kind of disappointing. But anyways, if you like this video, please like it and share it. Thanks a lot for watching, and you guys have a good one.